right, now getting to USC's perspective on this 14 playoff. So, of course, the math is obvious. Anyone with half a brain knows that any team is more likely to make a 12-team playoff than a 14 playoff. But, of course, there are different ratios for everyone. Ohio State doesn't care so much about a 12-team playoff as much as Penn State does, for example, of course, based on recent history and Ohio State's ability to make a 14 playoff and Penn State's would-be ability to make a 12-team playoff, for example. So looking at USC, of course, they have not been up to the challenge for quite some time, have really not competed what I would consider seriously for a playoff bid during the playoff era, although that of 2016 team, of course, got off the deck of 1-3, and it's arguable to say that they were playoff worthy by the end of the season, in which they beat Penn State in the Rose Bowl and beat the Pac-12 champion Washington by 2 scores, the team that did make the last college football playoff for the Pac-12. So looking at USC's perspective, if Lincoln Riley is all that he's supposed to be and getting this program back up in order, your take, and again, we want to direct people to Trojans Wire and Matt's work there in tackling some of these issues, but your perspective on USC and its ability to make a 14 playoff for the next, what would be 4 or 5 seasons.
Yeah, so I wrote about this at Trojans Wire, and when I mentioned 3 distinct talking points or pressure points, whatever you want to call them, in terms of USC getting the playoff. And I didn't rank them in order. I just kind of laid them out in bullet points. So no one should assume that it's like a hierarchy. But I will say, upon reflection, that just for 2022, not long term, but for 2022 in particular, I think the most immediate door opening for USC to get into a playoff, if it can go 12-1 under Lincoln Riley, is because, and to me, the most interesting part of the 2022 season nationally in college football, even more than Lincoln Riley and USC, it's Dabo at Clemson, because he lost both of his coordinators. I mean, Brent Venables was a core reason that Clemson went from here to here, reached the next level, became an annual juggernaut. So Dabo doesn't have his familiar coordinators. I mean, he was amazing not only in terms of getting Trevor Lawrence to stay an extra year, or Travis Etienne to stay an extra year. He had amazing skill in terms of retaining players for extra seasons, more than other programs might have. But the other thing is that he had amazing staff continuity. Like, his staffers stayed around for several years. They didn't bolt for other jobs. So the continuity is something that's been in Dabo's corner. It's a box that he's been able to check on an annual basis. So in 2022, we don't have that anymore. And Dabo Swinney's made no secret that he has a distaste for the transfer portal, and yet the portal's where really Clemson should have been able to replenish roster to a greater extent. He neglected that. He has to be on top of that a little more. So one can very easily envision a scenario in which, in 2022, in which Clemson begins to slip. Like, in other words, 2021 doesn't become a blip on the radar screen. It becomes the start of a trend. It becomes the start of a period of erosion due to Dabo failing to adjust in the same way that Nick Saban adjusted. Nick Saban famously said, "Is this what we want football to be? With the run-pass options, with the innovative offensive concepts." He was part of that 9-6 game against LSU in 2011. He loves a rock fight. He loves a slugfest. We all know what Nick Saban really loves in his heart of hearts. But he was willing to adjust with the times, right? And so now Dabo Swinney comes to that moment. Is he going to adjust with the times, or is he going to be stubborn? And if he is stubborn, Clemson could fall from that precipice where, you could enter every season pretty much penciling in the Tigers for one of those 4 college football playoff spots. And of course, if DJ Uiagalelei doesn't get fixed, if his game doesn't get repaired, if the yips don't get solved, so that one spot you could pretty much take for granted through 2020, that doesn't become a spot anymore. So in 2022, just 2022, if Clemson falls from the mountaintop, and doesn't get, or at least doesn't get back to where it was for the previous several years, that's the most immediate entry point for USC into the playoff, because you know that Ohio State's still loaded. You saw Ohio State's third and fourth string receivers put on a show in the Rose Bowl after Olave and Wilson opted out. So Ohio State's still going to be Ohio State. You still have, of course, the SEC, possibly with 2 teams making the playoff. So like those obstacles are going to be there. But of course, Oklahoma is going to go to the SEC. So the Big 12 champion is not going to be, as prominent, at least I don't think. We're now kind of talking beyond 2022, but the saying that Oklahoma has that seat at the table kind of in the same way that Clemson did, you can't really make that same statement. So with that in mind, Clemson is really at the forefront. And then as 22, it's, will a second SEC team get in and steal USC's spot? I think that Oklahoma being in the SEC in 2023 is actually going to help Lincoln Riley, interestingly enough, because Oklahoma is going to be a thorn in the side of Alabama and Georgia. And then the other team we haven't mentioned yet, but of course is going to be really important, Notre Dame. Notre Dame existing on that island, and USC playing Notre Dame at the end of a season next year. That's going to be the last regular season game for USC. It's going to be the Lincoln Riley versus Marcus Freeman matchup. So if both of those teams are 10-1 heading into game 12, well, so Notre Dame is going to be that team USC has to go through to make a 4-team playoff. So for 2022, it's Clemson. 2023 through 2025, it's that second team in the SEC and also Notre Dame. That's really the larger outlook for USC in terms of making a 4-team playoff while we still have it.